Showtime! The Capital G Show starts right now.
There are many different reasons a Yu-Gi-Oh card ends up on the Forbidden Unlimited list. Sometimes a card is just too powerful, like in the cases of Dimension Fusion or Sixth Sense. Sometimes a card just happens to be in an archetype that's winning too much. Whether or not we as duelists like when a card ends up on the ban list, there's usually a fairly valid reason as to why the card is there in the first place. However, sometimes it seems like it's the exact opposite, and there isn't much rhyme or reason as to why Konami hit a certain card, or at least it's just not a good reason. I'm talking about in the past, there are sometimes objectively bad cards that still manage to get this far on Konami's radar that they feel it necessary to place the card on the list. We all know that Konami is a very fallible company when it comes to handling the ban list, and in this video I'll be breaking down my picks for the most random cards to ever be on the FNL list at some point in time. The rules are pretty simple for this list. First off, I'll only be considering cards that appeared on a TCG list, so cards like Mermail Abyss, Life Equalizer, and Necros Cycle can't be included. Also, I'll be considering any card that appeared on a list in any capacity. This means banned, limited, or semi-limited are all a go. Well then, now that we have the rules in place, without further ado, I welcome you to the top 10 most random Yu-Gi-Oh cards to ever appear on the Forbidden and Limited list, the Yu-Gi-Oh hierarchy. Number 10, Abyss Soldier, semi-limited, April 2005 and September 2005. Let's kick off the list with a super old card that a lot of people watching this video may have never even heard of. If you've ever wanted a card just like Brionic, Dragon of the Ice Barrier, but significantly worse, this is definitely the monster for you. To be perfectly honest, this card never had any business being on the list at any point. Was it a fairly decent monster by the DM standards? Yeah, but let's be real here. The potential was nowhere near as high as Konami must have thought. I'll admit bounce effects were pretty strong and rare during DM, especially if they weren't built into flip monsters like Penguin Soldier and Hain. The real reason that Abyss Soldier never became a thing, even if Konami believed it was going to be so, was because Tribe Infecting Virus also existed. The fact that Abyss Soldier could discard Sinister Serpent for its effect was nice, but Tribe Infecting Virus could not only kill monsters rather than just bouncing, but it also wasn't once per turn, and it could use any card in your hand, not just Sinister Serpent. Maybe Konami foolishly thought that after Tribe was banned in September 05 that Abyss Soldier would take its place, but considering that they also banned Serpent on that same list, that plan was dead on arrival. Number 9, Dimensional Prison, semi-limited, September 2013 through April 2014. Apparently, this is where power creep gets you, a nice little spot on the ban list during the Zexal era of all times. Look, Deep Prison was, and really still is, a fantastic card, but good enough to be on the ban list? Come on. During the old days of GX, cards like Sakuretsu Armor and Widespread Ruin were insanely popular because 1-for-1s were very valuable, and Mirror Force was limited to 1. But the second that Deep Prison came out, those cards, with the exception of Mirror Force, were relegated to trade binders pretty much permanently. After all, banishing in Yu-Gi-Oh is way better than destroying because it's much more likely that a card is going to activate when it's destroyed as opposed to being banished. During the early Zexal era, Deep Prison's play absolutely skyrocketed, especially with the meta being so 1900 attack crazy, and it was common to see the card being played in Heroes, Dino Rabbits, Windups even. It was good against basically everything not named in sectors. Even with the high amount of play that the card saw, it's still pretty crazy to think that a 1-for-1 battle trap made the FNL list for an entire year, over 5 years after the card was initially released. Quick FYI, if you're wondering why Deep Prison wasn't nearly as popular during the 5Ds era, well, that's pretty easy. Cold Wave and Heavy Storm were both legal during 5Ds, but banned for Zexal. Number 8, Wall of Revealing Light, limited to 1 September 2007 to current. If you looked at Wall of Revealing Light and you just told your brain to omit all the degenerate crap in Yu-Gi-Oh, I seriously think that you'd be completely dumbfounded as to why this card has been limited to 1 for over a decade. On paper, Wall is just a really terrible attack stopper that's an absolute spell and trap removal magnet of the highest degree. You pay a bunch of life points, usually around 3,000, in hopes of stopping your opponents from ever being able to attack, realistically, that only works for about a turn or so max, and you're really just waiting for your opponent to get the card off the field and proceed to kill you since you carelessly invested all your life points into it. The real reason Wall was and still is limited to 1 is because it's one of the only cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That lets you pay nearly all of your life points instantly. While this might sound like a reckless and terrible thing to do, it also opens up the door for you to be able to fulfill the conditions of some very degenerate cards. This can include things like Last Turn, Life Equalizer, and Self-Destruct Button. I'm guessing Konami keeps this card at 1 in case they decide to make another card with a crazy life point activation condition in the future, but on the actual merits, Wall is just a terrible card on its own. Number 7, TG Striker, limited to 1, March 2012 through March 2013. The good old March 2012 ban list. I've referred to it as the worst and most controversial ban list in Yu-Gi-Oh! History, and it's hits like this one that validate my stand on it. Look, TG Striker isn't a bad card by any measure, but for Pete's sake, it wasn't even the best TG monster people were using at the time. When Marquise Henderson shocked the world by winning YCS Atlanta in February 2012 with TG Stun, Striker was the only TG monster he didn't run 3 copies of. So it's pretty silly to think that Konami designed the archetype to be hyper synchro, but its best variant was a skill drain stun deck, and the third best monster in the archetype would be the one getting hit of all things? That doesn't make any sense. Of course, there were rumblings of Striker being hit because of the OCG's TG agents, but that didn't make much sense either because that was never the most dominant deck over there. Then again, not a lot from the March 2012 ban list actually made sense. Number 6, Drop Off, limited to 1, April 2006. If you don't know, Konami has always had this really crazy draw lock phobia in Yu-Gi-Oh! It dates all the way back to Yatagarasu and the Yata lock, which essentially created the need for forbidden cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Luckily, Drop Off ain't no Yata. It's not Time Seal. Really, it shouldn't be mentioned in the same breath as those cards, let alone be placed on the ban list, which suggests that the card itself has legitimate merit. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. What happened here was Konami let their phobia briefly run wild as they did some pretty idiotic ban list changes on the April 2005 ban list. They banned Confiscation so that they could unban Delinquent Duo, which by the way they immediately flipped on the very next ban list. Somewhere in moving around all the actual broken cards, Konami thought to themselves, we can't have all these powerful hand disruptors with Drop Off at 3. Players will have their entire hands taken away from them, then they'll be Drop Off locked, just like Yata. This not only never came to fruition, of course, but Drop Off never actually saw play because the card was mediocre. People learned pretty early that a non-chainable trap that lets your opponent get cards in the graveyard isn't very good because it doesn't accomplish anything and it's incredibly bad if you're already losing. Number 5, Symbol of Heritage, limited to 1, April 2015 to current. To be completely honest, you can just refer to Symbol of Heritage as Lone Fire Blossom number 4 because that's really all this card has ever been good for or really used with. Symbol of Heritage is as old as dirt. The card is from Shadow of Infinity, and under almost all situations in the game, it's a completely unreliable and unusable card. After all, you have to have 3 copies of a single monster in your graveyard to even activate it. While there are cards in these Skull Servant and Cyber Dragon archetypes that meet that criteria, Lone Fire Blossom does it so much better. With Lone Fire Blossom, you can simply tribute all 3 copies of the card in a single turn and summon another plant monster, thus meeting the conditions to activate it instantly. I personally believe after Konami limited Soul Charge to 1 during the July 2014 ban list, they feared that people might start replacing those copies with Symbol and decided giving plant decks a billion copies of Monster Reborn was probably a bad idea because we did see Plant Synchro dominate the Synchro era. So they decided to limit the card instead, despite the fact that it really only works with like 1% of the card pool. Number 4, Primal Seed, limited to 1, March 2011 through January 2014 in the TCG, still currently limited in the OCG. Just like our last card, Primal Seed is another one that got limited despite only working with a few other cards. The first thing to note here is that Primal Seed was released alongside the Chaos Monsters and Invasion of Chaos, so technically all the FTKs that you can do with the card right now in the TCG were completely possible back then as well, which just, well, no one really really knew about the combos back then. What makes hitting this card on the ban list so very random and pretty unbelievable was because at the times when Blackluster Soldier and Chaos Emperor Dragon were banned, no one ever imagined that they would be coming off the list in any capacity. I mean ever. And also, to my knowledge, this is one of the only times in Yu-Gi-Oh history where there was actually 100% no legal way to activate a card, and it was literally unplayable in both the TCG and the OCG for over half a decade. In the end, Primal Seed was limited to one format prior to Blackluster's return. Imagine that. A card went from 5 straight years of being technically unusable to boom, instantly limited. Now that's the definition of random. Number 3, Dark Scorpion Chick the Yellow, semi-limited, April 2005. You might actually be really shocked to learn that for some stupid unexplained reason, there was actually a time when Mirac's Machiura the Destructor was not only legal, but was playable at semi-limited status. Why am I mentioning Machiura the Destructor when I'm supposed to be talking about Chick the Yellow? Well, it's because Machiura was 100% to blame for Chick getting semi-limited. The Dark Scorpion Burglars, with the exception of Borg, he's just trash and we're not going to talk about him, were actually pretty good cards with multiple nice utility effects, especially during the DM era when they were initially released. And even with Don Zalug being one of the most in-demand cards from the entire Pharaonic Guardian set, none of them were so good that they needed to be addressed by the ban list. But because of Konami's neglect, yes, this is on them, an OTK arose using Call of the Haunted, Machiura the Destructor, and Chick the Yellow. The combo was quite simple too. All you needed was Call in your hand and Chick in the graveyard, and then you had to get Machiura in the graveyard some way. This was usually done through Graceful Charity or Tribe Infecting Virus. This now lets you activate Call of the Haunted from your hand to revive Chick and attack your opponent. When Chick dealt damage, it would be able to activate its effect and bounce Call of the Haunted straight to your hand, thus destroying itself, and you'd simply repeat the process until your opponent was dead. This combo should have never been a thing because Machiura should have been banned upon release. Shame on you, Konami. You got Chick hit on the ban list and it didn't even need to happen. Number 2, Good Goblin Housekeeping, semi-limited, April 2005 through March 2007. Oh yeah, I remember this. I like to refer to this as the Konami was afraid that every draw card in the game was broken, no matter how crappy it is, period. Let's get one thing very clear here. Good Goblin Housekeeping is not a good card, and it was never a good card. This is another instance of Konami fear-mongering and thinking, oh dear, what if someone has 2 copies in the graveyard? When they activate the 3rd one, they'll draw like 3 cards and that's broken. And yes, while technically you would draw 3 cards, not only would you have to put 1 card back at the bottom of your deck, but seriously man, who's trying to jump through all of those damn hoops? During this time period in Yu-Gi-Oh, Konami didn't often think about the practicality of plays, but rather the raw potential of a card. I can personally assure you that no one was willing to play 3 copies of Housekeeping on the minuscule chance that you could actually pull that play off, or maybe even something more incredible involving, I don't know, like emergency provisions where you'd get 3 draws and 3,000 life points. But really, no one was playing this card. Honorable mentions include Constellar M7, limited to 1 September 2013, Emergency Call, semi-limited March 2012 and September 2012, and Protector of the Sanctuary, limited to 1 September 2004 through September 2006, and finally to our number 1, the Transmigration Prophecy, limited to 1 September 2007 through July 2014. Now this is getting a raw deal. I said earlier that sometimes a card's too powerful, sometimes a card is just in the wrong place at the wrong time, but then there's this ridiculously stupid situation that happened with the Transmigration Prophecy where the card was limited for almost 7 straight years. Let me just start off by saying that the Transmigration Prophecy was never used in some super intricate degenerate FTK or OTK, and the card was never really all that good. It was limited to 1 for one and only one reason, and it's honestly so stupid it's kind of hard to believe. During the GX era, when gadgets were first released and instantly rose to legit meta contenders, Konami got it in their head that by running multiple copies of the Transmigration Prophecy, players would be able to essentially make it so that they could never run out of gadgets. Pretty crazy, right? An endless supply of gadgets beating your opponent down. How could you possibly lose? The problem with this asinine theory of Konami's is that it doesn't incorporate the factor that gadgets need more than just a bunch of little ass monsters to succeed in a duel. Gadgets also need a consistent stream of 1-for-1 removal cards to get bigger monsters off the board. After all, if someone had something as simple as a Gravekeeper Spy, you could have infinite amount of green gadgets and you wouldn't have been able to attack over it. The theory was so fundamentally flawed that it made you question if Konami was even playing the game at the time. The Transmigration Prophecy was an okay card and it saw some fringe play, but it was more or less just used as a DD Crow type of card that was going to mainly disrupt your opponent's graveyard targeting plays rather than trying to infinitely recycle your own monsters. So the card got limited, but basically for no reason. So that's my list. You guys let me know how you thought I did in the comment section below. I actually did sift through every single card that has ever been banned in Yu-Gi-Oh!, TCG, and OCG history for this list, but it is incredibly subjective and there are probably a lot of cards that you guys have that could be added onto the list. Leave those in the comment section below as well. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already and turn on that notification bell for daily videos. Subscribing makes life happy.